I'm Samantha Yarock alongside Brian Dunseth to give you guys a quick preview of round one RSL heading to face the Seattle Sounders. Dunny, it took until literally the final minute of the regular season for RSL to punch their ticket to the postseason, but Damir Kreilach got it done. 16th goal of the year, probably the most important by far.
Yeah.
Tell me, first of all, we didn't have you on the broadcast, so where were you watching this game and what went through your head?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to be a part of the ESPN Decision Day broadcast and kind of the wraparound with Sebastian Salazar with John Champion and Taylor Twellman on site in Nashville. And we were kind of like, by the way, the mothership, oh boy, they had all the screens. And it was amazing.
You were in like
I was in heaven. I was just
control
sitting there
room.
like, oh my goodness, on the big boy sets. So this cascading moment in time of where, Justin opens up his hips, it's a parry down to his left, it's a recycled ball gets pushed out, comes back in, half deflection on the shot. And again, I must have watched it 5 or 10 times, not just Dami's goal, but if you watch the last second when Justin does his bicycle, watch his ankle, because he brings his foot up and locks it to make sure he gets over the ball to stay on frame and potentially come back down. So if Tim Mealy's got to go to his left or his right, there's an opportunity for a bouncing ball. And then Dami sticks a foot in. It's incredible.
So 34 games in the bag now. What did you learn about this 2021 RSL team? I know throughout all of our games, there were a lot of highs, a lot of lows.
Yeah.
Sometimes not sure which RSL team we were going to get, but in the end, they took care of it.
They did. And, I said in the beginning of the season, I was one of the few that thought this was a playoff team. And I wasn't trying to be a homer. I wasn't trying to be the guy that was like pontificating about what this roster could do. I just felt like when I man matched what this roster had positionally versus the other teams in the West, I kind of had them. I had them as a playoff team, but I thought that they could have ended up anywhere from 4th to 9th. And I think that's what we saw going into the final 2 games of the season. That Wednesday night at home against Portland, where they locked in the 4th place. I mean, that's the extraordinary part, because if you think about it, we only knew 2 things heading into Decision Day. We knew that the New England Revolution was the best team, and they were Supporters Shield champions. Yeah. And then we knew that Portland had a home field spot as 4th place. But I mean, you think about that. You had, 7 teams for 4 places in the East, and 6 teams for 4 places in the West. And what did I learn? The team's got heart. The team focused on what it could focus, which was their training habits on the field, how they took care of their bodies off the field, and ultimately stepping on the field and matching up. And I think, that we are fortunate enough to have these conversations privately with the players, and I think all of them recognize that in certain phases of the season, they could have been a lot better. Yeah. But I think the margins were so excruciatingly small this year because of the competition in the West, that the games that we thought were like 3 points in the back, 3 points in the back pocket, those weren't the case. And the games in which we thought like, oh, this is going to cause the team a bunch of trouble, they shine. So I just give the guys so much credit. I mean, we judge them based on the white lines for 90 minutes, and those games are what we're judging them on. But this is one of those seasons where there was so much more at play. So I give the guys a ton of credit.
So MLS in the midst of a FIFA break right now. So every team that's in the playoffs has had a couple weeks to maybe tinker, tweak some things. What is RSL? What do you hope they've been working on, sharpening up ahead of the first round?
Yeah. I mean, Albert was the only one that had to go away.
Yeah.
And he's coming off a 2-goal performance the other day for Slovakia, even though I've got my own issues with the coach of Slovakia. And
I think Albert does.
I'm sure I'm not the only one. For the players themselves, the mental anguish of this season has been immense. I have not been traveling, but you've been traveling with the team. And I don't think we can ever do enough in terms of the credit that we give to the players to understanding that win, lose, draw, that the players on the road are getting, like, literally eating, trying to recover immediately.
Yeah.
And then getting on a bus, going through security, getting on an airplane, and flying home. Now, as I'm saying that, it's much better than, what it used to be, which
Yeah.
was flying commercial
Yep.
and extending the process of travel. So the players are getting back. But I mean, how many times did you guys get back before
3 in the morning.
Yeah, I was going to say before midnight.
No, and then
not very
they're
often.
regenning most of the time the next day, especially with the way the condensed
Yeah.
schedule was towards the end.
Yeah.
It's a grind.
It is a grind. So the players, I think mentally, first off, it gives them that opportunity to take a break. Physically, obviously, everybody's carrying something. I don't, we do the kind of weekly like injury report. You could literally have all these guys on there, and it doesn't matter from like stitches to like recovery.
Damir has he has a bruise right under his eye.
Yeah.
That I'm like, I didn't even realize
Yeah.
it happened. I
Yeah.
did see it, but I didn't realize how bad it was
You
until
get
we
all,
saw him on
and
Tuesday.
whether you're talking about adductors or hamstrings or calves or back, or there's just soreness, and that's the point of the year. So yes, the 2-week window ultimately is an incredibly important and opportunistic situation for the training staff to take care of it, and duct tape, do whatever you got to do, but also, like say we use Bobby Wood for an example. This is where Bobby can really dig into his fitness and try to get himself up to full speed, because he is, it was a recovery phase, and the recovery phase is actually trying to play on the field and get minutes to work himself back up, as opposed to maybe having a couple games with the Monarchs. So all of these things are incredibly important. Now, the negative side of this is momentum, rhythm, sharpness, game situation. And, I was talking to Dax McCarty yesterday on our show on Sirius, and he was saying this is a great scenario for them because they can kind of train and get back to the tactical side. And that's something that you also kind of forget about, is like you can't really have these real in-depth sessions. So we saw Pablo, implement a 3-in-the-back system in real time, in real games, without any preseason, without really any time, and then revert to 4-in-the-back. And you saw a team that all of a sudden was some really great stuff in the 3-in-the-back to now some really great stuff with 4-in-the-back. So that's the other part. You get on the field. You can actually go through the tactical acumen of what you're trying to accomplish.
So we've talked a lot about RSL. Let's shift to the opponent for a moment. Seattle Sounders. They finished the regular season on a 6-game winless run.
Yeah.
3 losses, 3 draws, although they started on that 13-game unbeaten streak.
Yeah.
So that's how they ended up really in second place in the West. Are they vulnerable right now, or do you think that this break has given them a chance to reacclimate all the pieces that have been out and injured? And what's your take?
I mean, I think that vulnerable, that's an interesting word, because I think there's a lot of teams that are vulnerable heading into the playoffs. And first off, I want to give so much credit to Brian Schmetzer and the staff, because what they've done is nothing short of extraordinary. When you think about losing Nicolas Ladero, who, between acquisition cost and salary is a $10 million player. You lose Jordan Morris, who was on loan at Swansea City when he picks up his second ACL injury, to switch to 3-in-the-back, to obviously rely on Raul Ruidiaz in the manner in which they do, but have Joao Paulo, who absolutely is an MVP candidate for me. He's been fantastic. And then guys like Yamar in the back. And by the way, Stefan Fry was out for a long time.
When we were there, he was out.
Yeah, he was on the broadcast. Yeah, he was on the broadcast with Costigan and Casey. So when I look at the team, I think in certain phases of play, they're vulnerable. And they do such a great job. They're a transition team, but they're also a possession team. And they can build out of the back, and they can pull you around. And Kellen Rowe is playing such a massive role for this team, and nobody, he was a bit player, he was a cover player, and all of a sudden he's an absolute starter because of the injuries, because Christian's pulled a little bit higher, and you're trying to figure out with Joao Paulo who's the best match. And when you're playing 3-in-the-back versus having 4-in-the-back, that means there's 2 more wide attacking players. So I think set pieces, there's pros and cons. Possession, pros and cons. Transition, pros and cons. And it's just momentum. It's always about momentum, because if you would have told me August that Seattle would go off the boil and Portland would heat up, you would have said, like, have you been watching these 2 teams? Like, what are you talking about? And then all of a sudden you see the way it ends. So is it a great matchup? I don't think there's a great matchup for Real Salt Lake. But I'll tell you this, I don't think that RSL has anything to lose at this stage of the season, whereas Seattle was so good that they are going to look at RSL as a threat, especially after the game and the loss here at Rio Tinto Stadium a couple months ago.
So the Sounders making their 13th straight postseason appearance. They've done it every single year that they've been in the league. For the last 5 MLS Cups they've been a part of, winning 2. How does RSL overcome that? Because I went through player by player, and the number of appearances on Seattle in the postseason versus RSL, it's massive.
Yeah.
How do you overcome that? And the fact of playing at a place like Lumen Field with 60,000 probably, you know, how do you match that?
You can't. I mean, that's, you know, everything that you're touching on, those touch points are correct. And I think the one thing to kind of like think about, and I've tried to get into this on the broadcast, but you know, people don't really want to hear it. The discretionary spend for Seattle is the spend that I continue to hope for when new ownership comes for Real Salt Lake. Because, and there's still a risk, right? Because Nico Ladero, I'm talking about how much money he costs, and look at he was out a majority of the season, like literally 95%.
Is he fully healthy?
He's as healthy as he's going to get at this stage of the season. But you think about, like, let's use Rui Diaz, $5 million acquisition, and then $5 million a year, $4 or $5 million a year. Same with Ladero, $5 million acquisition cost, $5 million. So they're in what, year 3, year 4? So I mean, my maths aren't that great, but
I actually did the math.
You're looking 20 to 25 million for these guys.
Yeah.
When it's all said and done. So how do you, and Garth Logway's done an extraordinary job, and now Craig Weibel's up there as an assistant, and Schmet's taking over for Ziggy Schmidt, rest in peace, has done a fantastic job. But you know, when you look at this team and the way that they've constructed the roster, they should be in the playoffs. I mean, the fact that they're in the playoffs 13 years in a row, great, but like, you know, it was also, when you go from Obafemi Martins and Clint Dempsey and Ozzie Alonso and Chad Marshall, and then you then turn around to Raul Rui Diaz, Nicolas Ladero, Joao Paulo, Yamar.
Rolled on.
And rolled on, and Jordan developing in real time. All of these things are feather in the cap. But this is kind of like where we're in an interesting phase in Major League Soccer. We have clubs that are willing to spend extraordinary amounts of money and not necessarily have success, because you know, like, look at Atlanta.
Miami.
Look at
Let's look at Miami.
Oh boy. But then, like, look at the 2 LA clubs.
Yeah.
Like, who would have thought that literally all the Texas clubs and all the California clubs would be out in the Western Conference?
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that just because you spend money that you're absolutely.
You have to do it in the right.
You have to spend the right way. You have to have the right manager. You have to have the right locker room. So to your original question, how do you match that? How do you overcome that? Grit, determination, kind of walking in those gray areas of the dark arts in terms of making sure the referees giving calls in your favor, understanding on the artificial surface with, you know, it's going to be wet, it's going to be slick, it's going to be cold, it's going to be an incredible fan base for Seattle in terms of home support, and how can you kind of turn all of that momentum against them? Do you want to be a possession team? Do you want to be a transition team? Do you want to press high? Do you want to do mid block? Do you want to do low block? All those things, you know, Matt and Pablo are going to be working through in real time. But honestly, I don't, you know, there's not a touch point. You know, we say, like, start the game strong. You know, this whole thing about being in the front foot, that means getting in an early tackle. That means pinging them around, make them uncomfortable, maybe getting the crowd on, you know, offsetting the crowd and the vibe. All set pieces, corners, you know, the matchups, digging in the referee. All those things matter in games like this. And I really don't think there's a discretionary spend margin between these two in terms of talent, all due respect to Seattle, but on nights like this, I think Real Salt Lake can play the underdog, and when you're playing the underdog, usually as we see the club have success.
So last question, what's it going to take for RSL to beat Seattle on the road and move on to the conference semifinals?
All the little things. Being smarter, being faster, having more. You know, we talk about possession, but having the better of the chances, and ultimately, when mistakes were made, can Real Salt Lake capitalize on the mistakes that Seattle make? And can they, when they make mistakes, recover? Because like we've seen in this team, when there's big results, it's usually that individual piece of brilliance, and I'm rubbing the fingers, like that feel of the game. That's when we see Real Salt Lake kind of pull off, I don't know what we're going to deem the impossible.